How's it going? It's Son Seb, and this is an introduction to Locksport. If you're one of my regular viewers, there isn't really going to be a lot of new information in this. I was asked by my local college to put together a little introduction to people who might not know anything about it and don't know that it's something that they want to get into. So I'm just going to basically go over very bare bones information, like the parts of a lock, how a lock works, how single pin picking and raking work, a little bit about homemade tools, and a few different types of locks. So first off, I guess the main thing is, what is Locksport? To sum it up, it's basically the manipulation of all things locks. Primarily is about non-destructive entry. Some people do get into drilling and cutting and lock testing, basically, to see how strong they are, what they can hold up to, but the main focus is things like picking, raking, bypassing, which would be like shimming a door latch to get in as opposed to working directly on the lock. It's not a criminal activity. Criminals actually very rarely use lock picking to get what they want. There's normally a much quicker destructive way in, like a brick through a window or a crowbar. Locksport is a large community and an ever-growing community, which is very supportive. There's always giveaways going on, people trading locks, just donating locks to other pickers. Everybody's pretty free with information. If they've learned how to do something that there's not a lot of information out there on, they'll typically share that information and make sure it gets out to all the other lock sporters. There's actually lock picking competitions. In Europe, it's actually a fairly popular sport with sometimes some pretty big cash prizes. And basically we see it as a physical, tactile puzzle. Figuring out how to get into a lock is just basically a little puzzle that you're mostly doing with your feeling, as opposed to working out calculations or anything in your head. And another big important thing to keep Locksport not criminal, there's two critical rules that we all have to follow. Never pick a lock that isn't yours, which I think goes without saying. You can sometimes maybe pick a lock if you're given permission by somebody, but I would advise caution with that. Make sure you trust the person and know exactly what they're getting you to pick the lock for. And the second rule is never pick a lock that you rely on. So you don't want to pick your front door lock or the ignition to your car, because if something goes wrong, you're going to have probably a big repair fee to get a lock changed out. It is possible to break locks by using them in ways that they're not really meant to be used. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what Locksport is. So before we get into picking, it's important to basically know how a lock works. This is going to focus on your standard pin tumbler. So as far as the parts go, this is what we typically call the Bible. When it's all together, it would be called a lock cylinder. There's holes in here which make up your pin chambers, which is where all the pins will sit. This is the plug, which also extends, the pin chambers extend into it, and that's what actually keeps the lock from turning, is the pins in the pin chambers, which once they're all together we call pin stacks. So the plug will sit inside the Bible like this, and if there's nothing blocking it, it will rotate freely. But that doesn't happen when the lock is locked, because we have pin stacks, sorry about the lighting there, which consist of a spring, a driver pin, and a key pin. So I'll go ahead and put the key pins into the plug and the driver pins above it, so you can kind of see how it would look once it's loaded. Okay, so now that we have the key pins and the driver pins placed into the plug, you can see how the driver pins sit up above the edge of the plug. So what we call that is the shear line, which is the line, the space basically between the plug and the Bible. So with those all sitting in there, that prevents the plug from turning. Then we'd have something on the back that would hold the plug in place. This one uses a little back plate with some screws. There's always something, of course, on top of all the pins to hold them down. But basically, once it's in use, the springs push the driver pins down and the key pins down, and then when you insert the proper key, it will lift all the key pins, which are all obviously cut to different lengths, up to the right height in order for the lock to turn. So this is a cutaway lock that you can see a little bit better how it sits in there and prevents the lock from turning. Can't turn it because the pins are in the way. Once I insert the key, all the pins are lifted, the driver pins are lifted above the shear line, and the key will turn freely. A little bit more information about that. We normally number the pin stacks 1 through however many pin stacks there are. So this is a 6-pin key and it's loaded to 6 pins. You just can't see the 6th. So starting from the outside of the lock is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The low parts on the key is where the pin will sit. That's usually called the cut or the cuts. All together, we'll call that the bitting of the key. So obviously there's all sorts of different bittings. Some go really high and really low, which is normally more difficult to pick. Some are a little bit more even across, and those are usually easier, typically, to pick. A little bit more about pins. Another part of Locksport a lot of people like to get into is challenge lock making. There's different designs for pins that will make it more challenging to pick. Some of these sorts of designs will get caught on the shear line and require you to turn the plug back a little bit in order for them to set. We'll get into that a little bit more again once we get further into picking. So the way picking works, single pin picking is one method where you directly attack each individual pin until it's set in place and then move on to another pin to set it until all the pins are set, where the driver pins are above the shear line and the key pins below, and the lock will turn. There's also raking, which uses a tool, something along these lines, where you can affect multiple pins at once in a random manner, and hopefully you can get them all pushed up to the right height. It can work really quickly or it can not work at all. It's a little bit more of a random attack, whereas single pin picking, you'll use something like that, where you can reach in and touch each individual pin to push it above the shear line. And the way that it actually works physically is we would use a tool like this or something like this to apply torque to the plug. So what that does is, obviously I can't turn it because it's locked, but because nothing can be manufactured exactly perfectly, you're going to have one of the pins that's going to be the pin that's preventing it from turning. By putting a little bit of torque on that, it'll apply pressure to the pin, and you'll be able to feel that the pin is what we call binding. And as you push it up, once the driver pin passes the shear line, usually you can hear or feel a little click, and sometimes you can't feel the core move or the plug move, sometimes you can, but the plug will move slightly and be binding against the next pin. So you go through, find each of the pins, whichever order they bind in, set them all, and you've got the lock open. Same idea with a rake. So what I showed you is called top of the keyway tension, because we're applying the torque to the top of the keyway. The other way that we can apply tension is bottom of the keyway. So that's what you'd use one of these types of tools for, and you'll apply it from the bottom. And usually that's what you'll do with a rake, because you'll pull the top of the keyway tensioner out, and then you do something like that until it opens. I'll go ahead and give a little demonstration of that. Okay, so I have my cutaway lock here loaded up, and you should be able to see me picking. You won't be able to see the 6th chamber because it's kind of hidden by the metal here, but you'll be able to see the 1st through 5th. I'm going to apply some top of the keyway tension and see if I can get this open. So I'm going to feel through the lock, looking for the pin that gives a little bit of resistance, and then once I push on it I should get some clicks. Now I have some serrated pins in here which have little grooves in them, which will give a click without it actually setting the pin. So once you've picked for a while, you get used to the different feelings when a pin's set and when it's not quite set yet. No, it doesn't quite feel set yet. It's still giving a lot of resistance. Once it is set, you can usually give it a little jiggle and feel that it's not completely bound up. And sometimes you'll have pins fall back down. I could hear that there. Looking for a binder. It's a lot of feel involved in lock picking, like I was saying. It's a physical, tactile puzzle. It's a little bit of a learning curve to get used to that, to get your feeling kind of attuned. But once you do, you start opening up a lot more locks. So if you do decide to start, don't get discouraged. It took me probably a week before I got my first one to open really well. But once I did, I started getting more and more. Alright, so I felt the plug move a little bit, which may be what we call a bit of a false set. That's where the lock turns but gets caught on a lip of one of the pins, like a spool. And it requires a little bit of counter rotation to bring it back and get that pin to set. I can hear some pins dropping. And I don't want to overset anything, which is when you push the pin too high and the key pin gets caught at the shear line. I think that might have been an overset there. But you can always recover from it. Just release a little bit of tension, let it fall back down. I feel like I'm getting close. Something's holding me up. That felt like a little bit of a false set. So probably one or more of the mushrooms will be not set. And I'll need to figure out which one it is by feeling for the core trying to turn back. Then you release some tension, you let it turn, and you let it click back into place. Usually you'll go back into that false set. Trying to find the binder. What isn't set? Just gonna give him, feels very close, but something. There we go. And it's open. So that's how single pin picking works. Once I put it back, the pins will fall back down and you're happy. So I'm going to try to show you here how raking works. With the security pins, I may not be able to get it, but you'll be able to see what it looks like while I'm raking. So you get an idea of how some of the pins will set, and if you just happen to get the right combination with the right tension, you can get it open. You want to be always adjusting your tension, letting any overset pins fall from time to time. So this doesn't seem to be working, but I'll show you some raking on a different lock, one that I know will work. So here I have quick set. It's a door lock that's been removed, and I know that this one can rake open using what we call an L rake or a city rake, and it uses more of a rocking motion and basically simulates a bidding of a key. Works well on locks without any security pins. As you can see, those are two kind of the main methods for getting into a lock. If you're looking to start out in Locksport, of course there's lots of places that you can buy professional kind of tools commercially available. I got all of mine from Sparrows, which is a Canadian company based out of Toronto, and they're a good value for what you get, but it can get to be a lot of money buying picks that you like from a commercial company. Good news is you don't have to. It's not required. If you stick with it for a while, you'll probably want to, but I have here a number of things that I've actually made myself, and you can definitely do too. Doesn't take a lot. I've got a pick and a tension wrench that I've made out of bobby pins. I've also got some paper clip, tension wrench, and hook. This is a plug spinner, which some locks you may open, say, clockwise, but you can turn it counterclockwise and it picks easier that way. So you might want to pick it that way. You can use something like this, which you can load up, and it'll spin the plug so fast that the pins don't have time to set. So then you can turn it to the opposite side. This is what we refer to as a snap gun. It's another attack method for getting into a lock. It uses something like the same principle as Newton's cradle, where you hit the bottom pins sharply and quickly all at the same time. That sends the energy through to the driver pins, which bounces them up above the shear line, and you'd use a tension wrench to turn it over. Also, you can make tension wrenches just as good as the ones that you'd buy off a commercial website using wiper inserts. You can get these out of your old windshield wipers. Be careful taking them out. It is spring steel. If you don't slide them out the end, if you try to ply them out, it might go through your eyeball. So take those out with caution. But that's pretty well exactly what these bottom of the keyway tension wrenches are made out of. It's just the spring steel from wiper inserts, and these are ones that I bought off of Sparrows, so you can easily make something just as good on your own and customize it however you like, with twists, without twists, bent at different angles. It offers a lot of flexibility. Also, the wider inserts, kind of like this one, if you have files, you can file that into a hook. So you can make your own hooks with these. You can make your own tension wrenches, and it really doesn't have to cost anything. So now that I've talked about, your regular pin tumbler locks. That's obviously not all that there is in the world of locks. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about them, but this is what we call a dimple lock. It's basically the same as a regular pin tumbler, it's just the keyway is oriented sideways, so it's a little bit different to get into, and there's specialized picks for that. This would be called a flag pick, so it lets you get in under the pins and lift them with a rotating motion. Of course, there's combination locks. Getting into one of these is what we'd call decoding. I'm not going to get really big into the methods, but you can use a little feeler in between the wheel and feel when you're getting to the right spot to set it. Not something I've really got into, so I'm not going to say much more than that. But that is another type of lock that Locksporters have fun with. There's disc detainer locks, which are like Abloy was kind of one of the big companies that uses them. They work by rotating discs. Once they rotate to the right orientation, it allows a little locking bar instead of pins to drop into a hole that lets you rotate the plug. Not really a plug, but rotate the core. There's also wafer locks. You can't really see in there, but the wafer crosses the shear line, so you either need to lift or push down each of the wafers until all of the wafers are flush with the plug, and that'll let you turn it. There's warded locks, which have a little actuator in the back of the keyway with some warding, which is pieces of metal that would fit between some of those holes. So if you have the wrong key, there's going to be metal blocking the key to turn. What else have I got here? Oh, tubular locks, which are, again, basically it's the same, it's a pin tumbler. It's just instead of all the pins in a line, they're lined up in a circle, so you have to push them in to the correct depth to get the plug to turn. Interesting thing about this is that since it does turn in a rotational motion, you're only going to get a bit of a turn, and then the drivers will push back into your key pins. So then you'll need to pick it again to go another step over, and you'll also have to do the same thing to pick it back. They're interesting locks for sure. And there's also wafer locks, which have, lever locks, which have a series of levers inside that line up with this, similar to a disc detainer. The cuts on the key will turn your lever to the right position, which will allow the actuator to open the lock. Again, different tools required for most of these locks, and I haven't really gotten into them yet. I'm still just working on the basics. But there's a lot to do in the world of Locksport. There's safe cracking as well. Like I said, competitions, an excellent supportive community that will welcome any newcomers with open arms, and tons of information and assistance all across the world. Can't recommend Locksport enough if you're looking for a hobby that has a very involved and supportive community. But that's basically, I think, all that I've got to say about Locksport. Hopefully I've given you kind of a good rundown of some of the stuff that we do, and if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. Do searches on YouTube. Has tons and tons of Locksporters sharing information, showing different tools that you can make, different techniques to get into locks, reviewing different locks. Do some searches. If if any of my regular subscribers want to share any of their videos that would help people getting started, that could supplement some of this information, I welcome you to leave links in the comments, and maybe I'll put together a playlist or put them into the description as they come. But I hope you've enjoyed this and learned something if you're not familiar with Locksport. That's all I've got to say for today. Have a good one.